The morning of August 13th, 1944, Normandy, France. A narrow sunken lane between Écouché and Argentan. SS Oberscharführer Ernst Bachmann sits in the commander's cupola of his Panzerkampfwagen Weissführung B, the King Tiger. Through his scissor periscope, he scans the bocage hedgerows, watching for movement. His tank weighs 68 tons. The frontal glacis plate beneath his boots is 150mm of face-hardened steel, sloped at 50 degrees. Effective thickness, over 200mm. According to the technical manual issued by Waffenamt Prüfwesen 6 in March of 1944, this armour is theoretically immune to penetration by any Allied anti-tank weapon at combat ranges. Bachmann has commanded tanks since 1942. He survived Kursk, where Tiger crews learned they could absorb punishment that would annihilate any other armoured vehicle. He has internalized a simple equation: German engineering superiority plus superior armour thickness equals survival. This is not propaganda. This is mathematics, verified at the Kummersdorf proving grounds outside Berlin. 3 American M4 Sherman tanks appear at the crossroads ahead. Range, approximately 300 meters. The lead Sherman mounts the newer 76mm gun, a weapon Bachmann knows can penetrate roughly 100mm of vertical armour at this distance. His frontal armour, sloped and hardened, presents an effective barrier nearly twice that thickness. He is safe. The doctrine says so. The testing says so. 2 years of combat experience says so. The Sherman's gun barrel swings toward him. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Inside the Sherman, Sergeant Lafayette G. Poole orders his loader to chamber a round marked with an unusual silver-coloured penetrator tip. The loader, Corporal Del Boyce, had never fired this ammunition before. They received 3 rounds yesterday with instructions to use them only against the heaviest German armour, only at ranges under 800 meters. The round is designated T4 HVAP hypervelocity armour piercing. Poole knows nothing about the tungsten carbide core inside, or the aluminum sabot that will fall away after leaving the barrel. He knows only what the ordnance officer told him. This round is different. The Sherman fires. The HVAP projectile exits the barrel at 1,200 meters per second, 50% faster than standard armour-piercing ammunition. The sabot separates in flight. The tungsten-core, smaller in diameter but denser and faster than a conventional 76mm projectile, strikes the King Tiger's lower glacis at the junction point where the frontal armour meets the hull floor, one of the few locations where effective thickness drops slightly below 200mm due to geometric constraints. The projectile penetrates. Ernst Bachmann does not immediately understand what has happened. There is a sound, sharp, metallic, final, then fire. His radio operator screams. Bachmann hits the cupola release and throws himself out of the hatch. He lands in the ditch beside the road as flames erupt from the engine compartment. Behind him, the tank that was supposed to be invulnerable burns. He stares at it. The penetration should not exist. The mathematics should not permit it. But the entry hole in the glacis plate is undeniable. A clean puncture through armour that was certified impenetrable. This is the moment. Not of death, but of understanding. The moment when 2 years of doctrine collapse under the weight of physical evidence. When the promise of invincibility reveals itself as temporary, conditional, already obsolete. This story is not about a single tank or a single engagement. It is about the psychological shattering that occurred across the German Panzer arm in the summer and fall of 1944, when the most elite tank commanders in the Wehrmacht realized that 200mm of frontal armour was not, in fact, enough. It is about the collision between ideology and physics, between what they were promised and what they encountered. It is about the moment Germany's armoured warfare doctrine built on the foundation of material superiority met a reality it could not deflect, building the world. To understand this shattering, we must first understand the belief system it destroyed. By 1943, German tank doctrine had evolved into something approaching a military philosophy. While the Soviet Union mass-produced the T-34, eventually building over 50,000 units, and while American factories turned out Shermans at a rate that would reach 49,000 by war's end, Germany chose a fundamentally different path. Not quantity, but quality. Not numerical superiority, but technological dominance. Not expendable weapons, but invincible ones. The Panzer Kampfwagen VI Tiger, introduced in August of 1942, embodied this philosophy. At 54 tons, it mounted the 8.8cm K-36 gun, a weapon derived from the legendary Flak 18 anti-aircraft gun that had proved devastatingly effective against Allied tanks in North Africa. The Tiger's frontal armor, 100mm thick and nearly vertical, could withstand direct hits from the Soviet 76mm gun and the American 75mm gun that equipped most Allied medium tanks in 1943. The psychological impact on German crews was profound. Otto Carius, who would become one of Germany's highest-scoring tank aces, commanded Tigers with Schwer Panzerabteilung 502 on the Eastern Front. In his post-war memoir, published in 1992, he described the first time he entered combat in a Tiger. The Russians fired at us continuously. Hits rang against the armor like hammer blows on an anvil. But nothing penetrated. We advanced through their fire, as if through a hailstorm that could not touch us. The feeling was not of invincibility that would be too abstract. It was simpler. We knew, with mathematical certainty, that their guns could not harm us. This was not mere propaganda. The combat mathematics supported the doctrine. At Kursk in July of 1943, SS Untersturmführer Franz Stordegger, commanding a Tiger of the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler Division, engaged a Soviet tank formation near the village of Syolkny. In approximately 15 minutes, Staudegger's Tiger destroyed 22 T-34 seconds. The Soviet return fire inflicted no penetrating hits. The exchange rate 22 kills for 0 losses suggested that even massive numerical inferiority could be overcome through technological superiority. German war production statistics from Reichsminister Albert Speer's Armaments Ministry demonstrate the logic. If one Tiger could eliminate 20 enemy tanks before being knocked out, Germany did not need to match Allied production numbers. They needed only to produce enough Tigers to maintain a favorable exchange rate until Allied morale and industrial capacity collapsed under unsustainable losses. But by late 1943, battlefield reports indicated that the Tigers were not quite as invulnerable as initially believed. Soviet 85mm guns, when they achieved flank shots at close range, could penetrate Tiger armor. American 76mm guns, introduced in late 1943, posed a similar threat at shorter distances. The British 17-pounder anti-tank gun could defeat Tiger frontal armor at ranges under 1,000 meters under optimal conditions. Germany's response was characteristically extreme. Build a better Tiger. Development of the Tiger II, designated Panzer Kampfwagen VI, Ausführung B, but commonly called the Königstiger, or King Tiger, by Allied intelligence began in February of 1943. The first production models rolled out of the Henschel factory in January of 1944. This was not an incremental improvement. This was a fundamental redesign built around a single principle: absolute frontal immunity. The King Tiger's hull armor was revolutionary. The frontal glacis consisted of 150mm of face-hardened steel, sloped at 50 degrees from vertical. Basic trigonometry yields an effective thickness exceeding 200mm, double that of the original Tiger. The turret front was 180mm thick, sloped at 10 degrees. The mantlet, the curved armor shield protecting the gun mounting, added another 180mm. More importantly, the King Tiger mounted the 8.8cm KOK 43 liters, 71 gun, a weapon with a barrel length of 71 calibers, compared to the Tiger I's 56 calibers. Muzzle velocity increased from 810 meters per second to 1,000 meters per second. Penetration performance increased accordingly. At 1,000 meters, the KRK 43 could defeat 200mm of vertical armor. No Allied tank-mounted armour even approaching this thickness. Testing at the Wehrmacht's Kummersdorf proving grounds in Brandenburg verified the armour performance. American 76mm armour-piercing rounds, fired at the glacis plate at ranges of 500 metres, failed to penetrate. The projectiles either shattered against the face-hardened surface or deflected off the slope. British 17-pounder armour-piercing shot, tested at 300 metres, similarly failed. Soviet 85mm rounds produced identical results. The technical report, dated March 5, 1944, concluded, the PZ, KPFW, VI OSF. B presents frontal armour immunity against all currently fielded Allied anti-tank weapons at combat ranges exceeding 200 metres. Crews may engage enemy armour at maximum range with confidence that return fire poses minimal penetration threat to frontal aspects. This conclusion was incorporated into tactical doctrine. The King Tiger Crew Manual, Tiger Fibel II, issued to crews in April of 1944, instructed commanders to engage enemy armour at long range and to advance under fire when necessary, confident in their frontal protection. Unlike the Sherman, which doctrine instructed to avoid frontal duels and seek flanking positions, the King Tiger was designed to win frontal engagements through superior armour and firepower. SS Hauptsturmführer Heinz von Westenhagen, who assumed command of Schwer SS Panzer Abteilung 501 inches May of 1944, later recalled the briefing when his battalion received its first King Tigers. The weapons officer from division explained the armour scheme in detail. He showed us the test results from Kummersdorf. He told us explicitly, "You are driving in a fortress. The American 76mm cannot penetrate your frontal armour at any combat range. The Russian 85mm cannot penetrate beyond 200 metres. You may advance with confidence." This was not propaganda. These were engineers presenting test data. The psychological impact was immense. To the German tank commanders who had survived the brutal attrition of the Eastern Front, the King Tiger represented more than tactical superiority. It represented a return to the confident offensive spirit of 1941 and 42, when German armour advanced seemingly unstoppable across Soviet territory. It promised an end to the grinding defensive warfare that had characterized 1943 and early 1944. But there were problems the armour could not solve. The King Tiger's weight created severe mechanical stress. The Maybach HL 230 P30 engine, a 12-cylinder gasoline power plant producing 700 horsepower, had been designed for the 45-ton Panther, medium tank. Now it had to propel 68 tons. The power-to-weight ratio dropped to approximately 10 horsepower per ton, compared to 15 for the Sherman and 18 for the T-34. Maximum road speed was listed as 41 km per hour, but this was theoretical. Actual cross-country speed rarely exceeded 15 km per hour. The transmission suffered catastrophic failures with alarming frequency. The Maybach Olvar OG 401216B gearbox, originally specified for lighter vehicles, could not handle the torque loads. Oberleutnant Wilhelm Senger, whose company in Schwer Panzer Abteilung 503 received 12 new King Tigers in May of 1944, recorded in his war diary. Of 12 machines delivered on May 24, only 7 successfully reached the railhead at Mayele Kamp. 2 suffered final drive failures within 5 kilometers. 3 experienced transmission problems before completing the road march. Our battalion entered combat at 58% strength before encountering the enemy. Fuel consumption was devastating. The King Tiger consumed approximately 1 litre of gasoline per kilometre on paved roads, more on rough terrain. The internal fuel capacity was 860 litres, giving a theoretical range of 170 kilometres on roads, but often less than 80 kilometres cross-country. By June of 1944, Germany's fuel situation had become critical. Allied bombing of synthetic fuel plants reduced production by 35%. Albert Speer's ministry reported in June that Panzer divisions were receiving 30 to 40% of their authorized fuel allocations. These logistical realities created a cruel irony. The tank, designed for offensive breakthrough operations, could barely move. The weapon, meant to restore German tactical mobility, was bound to defensive positions by its own weight and fuel requirements. Yet, despite these limitations, when King Tigers first engaged Allied armour in Normandy, the results seemed to validate every promise the engineers had made. The collision with reality begins Operation Goodwood. July 18, 1944. The British Second Army launched a massive armoured thrust toward Caen, attempting to break through German defences south of the city. 3 armoured divisions, the Guards Armoured Division, the 7th Armoured Division, and the 11th Armoured Division, committed over 300 tanks to the assault. Defending a key sector along the Burgebus Ridge was Schwer SS Panzer Abteilung 503. The unit had 12 operational King Tigers positioned in hull-down defensive positions overlooking the open ground south of Cagny. The British tanks advanced across relatively open terrain. The King Tigers opened fire at ranges exceeding 2,000 metres distances, where British 75mm and even some 17-pounder guns lacked sufficient accuracy and penetration. The German gunners, firing from prepared positions with clear fields of fire, achieved hit rates approaching 40% on the first volley. British Shermans and Cromwells exploded at ranges where they could not effectively return fire. When British tanks did manage to close the range and engage, their projectiles struck King Tiger frontal armour and deflected harmlessly. SS Unterscharführer Franz Joseph Strauss, a loader in King Tiger No. 214, later recalled, "It sounded like someone throwing stones at a steel door. We heard impacts constantly. The commander counted 11 hits in the first hour. None penetrated. We fired. They burned. They fired. Nothing happened. It was exactly as promised." By the end of the day, the King Tigers of Schwer SS Panzer Abteilung 503 claimed over 40 confirmed kills. German losses: 0 King Tigers destroyed by enemy fire. But Strauss noted something troubling in the aftermath. Of 12 King Tigers that began the battle, only 9 remained operational by evening. The 3 non-operational vehicles had not been hit. 1 suffered a final drive failure. 1 experienced engine overheating and seized pistons. 1 ran out of ammunition. Each King Tiger carried only 84 rounds, and in the intensive firing, several tanks exhausted their combat load. Resupply did not arrive for 3 days due to Allied air interdiction of supply routes. The exchange rate appeared favourable. 40-plus Allied tanks destroyed for 0 German tank losses to enemy fire. But the King Tigers had effectively removed themselves from the battlefield through mechanical attrition and ammunition exhaustion almost as effectively as if they had been destroyed by enemy action. Still, the frontal armour had held. The doctrine remained valid. The promise of invincibility remained intact. Across the Atlantic Ocean, American ordnance officers were working frantically on a problem. The standard American 76mm M1 gun, mounted on later model Shermans, fired the M62, armor-piercing capped ballistic cap round. This projectile, weighing 7 kilograms, left the barrel at 790 meters per second. At 500 meters, it could penetrate approximately 100 millimeters of vertical homogeneous armor. Against sloped armor, penetration performance decreased significantly. Against the King Tiger's glacis, 150 millimeters sloped at 50 degrees, the M62 round was effectively useless at any combat range. The Americans could not quickly redesign the gun. They could not increase barrel length or chamber pressure without requiring a complete weapon system redesign that would take years, but they could change the ammunition. The solution emerged from basic physics. Penetration is a function of sectional density multiplied by velocity squared. If you cannot increase projectile mass or diameter, increase velocity. If you cannot increase velocity through gun modifications, decrease projectile mass while maintaining propellant charge. The T4 hypervelocity armor-piercing projectile used a subcaliber design. Instead of a full 76mm projectile, The T4 consisted of a tungsten carbide core approximately 45 mm in diameter, surrounded by an aluminum sabot that brought the total diameter to 76 mm. Upon exiting the barrel, aerodynamic forces stripped the sabot away, leaving only the tungsten core in flight. The physics were elegant. The smaller, denser core achieved muzzle velocities approaching 1,200 meters per second, 50% faster than standard ammunition. The tungsten carbide core, though smaller in diameter, had superior sectional density compared to steel. Laboratory testing at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland demonstrated penetration performance of 190 mm of vertical homogeneous armor at 500 meters. Against sloped armor, performance decreased, but remained superior to standard ammunition. The problem was tungsten. The United States required tungsten for numerous war applications: machine tool bits, armor-piercing projectiles for multiple weapon systems, electrical contacts, high-temperature alloys. Domestic tungsten production could not meet demand. The majority came from imports primarily from China, Bolivia, and Portugal. German U-boat operations and the demands of other weapon systems created severe shortages. In August of 1944, the Ordnance Department allocated HVAP ammunition with extreme rationing. Each Sherman tank in frontline service received between 4 and 6 T4 rounds. Crews received explicit instructions: use HVAP only against heavy German armor, Tigers and Panthers. Use only at ranges under 800 meters, where accuracy could be assured. Do not waste these rounds on lighter targets. Most critically, German intelligence remained unaware that HVAP ammunition existed in field use. German signals intelligence had intercepted American radio traffic discussing special ammunition and tungsten rounds in general terms, but analysts dismissed these references as relating to anti-aircraft or anti-tank gun ammunition, not tank-fired projectiles. The Wehrmacht's intelligence assessment, dated July 20, 1944, concluded, American tank gun performance remains limited by the inherent ballistic constraints of the 76mm M1 weapon system. No significant penetration improvements anticipated in the near term. This intelligence failure created a critical asymmetry. German tank commanders operated under doctrine that assumed their frontal armor remained immune to American tank fire. American tank commanders, at least those who had received HVAP rounds, knew differently. The first confirmed engagement occurred on August 13th. The moment of shattering Ernst Bachmann survived the destruction of his King Tiger near Écouché. He and 3 crew members escaped the burning vehicle. The driver and radio operator died in the fire. Bachmann spent 2 hours hiding in a drainage ditch before rejoining German forces retreating eastward. When he reported to his company commander the following morning, he described the engagement in detail. Frontal hit at approximately 300 meters, complete penetration of the glacis plate, immediate fire. The company commander's response was immediate skepticism. Impossible. The Americans do not have guns that can penetrate our frontal armor at that range. You were hit in the side or rear. The chaos of combat confused your perception, Bachmann insisted. The commander ordered him to accompany a recovery team back to the site. The abandoned King Tiger might still be recoverable if the damage was not catastrophic. They found the tank where Bachmann had left it, burned out but intact enough for examination. The entry wound was unmistakable. A clean hole approximately 5 centimeters in diameter punched through the lower glacis plate. The angle of entry was nearly perpendicular. This was a frontal hit, not a flank shot. The penetration depth indicated a small caliber, high-velocity projectile, not the larger diameter rounds fired by 85mm or 17-pounder guns. The recovery officer photographed the damage and filed a report with divisional headquarters. The report concluded, "Enemy has deployed ammunition with penetration characteristics exceeding previous intelligence estimates. Recommend immediate tactical assessment." Bachmann's case was not isolated. On August 16th, near Ardennes, a King Tiger from 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, was knocked out by frontal penetration at approximately 400 meters. The crew survived and reported the engagement immediately. Division intelligence officers initially attributed the loss to a mine strike or concealed anti-tank gun, but wreckage examination confirmed another frontal penetration through the glacis. August 19th. A King Tiger from Schwer Panzer Abteilung 503 destroyed near Chambois. Frontal penetration at close range. August 21st. Another loss from Schwer SS Panzer Abteilung 101. Frontal armor defeated. The pattern was undeniable. SS Hauptsturmführer Heinz von Westernhagen, commanding Schwerer SS Panzer Abteilung 501, compiled incident reports from multiple units and submitted an urgent assessment to ISS Panzer Corps headquarters on August 23rd. Multiple confirmed instances of frontal armor penetration by enemy tank fire at ranges between 300 and 500 meters. Ammunition type unknown but demonstrates penetration performance, significantly exceeding previous American 76mm capabilities. All prior armor protection estimates must be considered invalid pending further intelligence. Request immediate guidance on tactical employment. The response arrived from OKW Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, the German Armed Forces High Command, on August 26th. The message was brief and devastating in its dismissiveness. Reports of American tank-fired frontal penetrations assessed as resulting from crew error, misidentification of hit location, or confusion under combat stress. Kummersdorf testing confirms PZ, KPFW, VI OSF, B frontal immunity against all known American tank weapons. Units are directed to maintain current tactical doctrine. Commanders will ensure crews understand armor protection capabilities to prevent morale degradation based on inaccurate battlefield assessments. But the crews knew. The physical evidence was irrefutable. The penetration holes existed. The destroyed tanks existed. The dead crew members existed. What followed was not panic, but something more insidious, the erosion of certainty. Otto Carius, by late 1944, commanding a company of Jagdtigers with Schwer Panzerjäger Abteilung 512, wrote in his memoir about this period, "We began to hear the reports. Tigers destroyed frontally. King Tigers penetrated at ranges, where they should have been immune. At first, we dismissed them. Crew error, we thought. Flank shots misreported as frontal hits. But the reports kept coming. Eventually, you could not ignore the evidence. Something had changed. The Americans had developed something new, or we had miscalculated something fundamental. Either way, the promise was broken. 200mm was not enough. The invincibility we had been promised that we had experienced for 2 years was gone. The psychological impact manifested in tactical changes. German heavy tank doctrine in 1943 and early 1944 emphasized aggressive forward deployment. King Tigers were breakthrough weapons, meant to lead assaults, absorb enemy fire, and create gaps for lighter vehicles to exploit. The armor was the weapon as much as the gun. By September of 1944, this doctrine had reversed. A tactical directive from Schwer SS Panzer Abteilung 503, dated September 7th, instructed, King Tiger commanders will maintain hull-down defensive positions whenever tactically feasible. Frontal engagements at ranges below 800 meters will be avoided when possible. If ambushed at close range by enemy armor, commanders are instructed to reverse to cover rather than rely on frontal armor protection. Close-range frontal duels are no longer considered acceptable risk. This was a fundamental doctrinal reversal. The tank designed for offensive operations was now being employed as a static defensive emplacement. The weapon meant to break through enemy lines was now hiding behind terrain features. Commanders began positioning King Tigers with only the turret exposed, using terrain to protect the vulnerable glacis. They avoided advancing through confined terrain villages, forests, bocage country, where American tanks might ambush at close range. They requested infantry support more frequently, using foot soldiers to clear potential ambush positions before tanks. advanced. These were the tactics of vulnerability, not invincibility, the material reality. But here lies the profound irony that German intelligence officers were beginning to understand by October of 1944. The HVAP ammunition that had shattered German confidence was already in critically short supply. American tungsten imports had declined sharply in mid-1944 due to shipping disruptions and increased demand from other industries. By September, HVAP production had decreased by nearly 60% from peak rates. The Ordnance Department prioritized HVAP allocation to anti-tank gun units rather than tank units. Many Sherman crews in October and November never received any HVAP rounds at all. A statistical analysis of American tank versus tank engagements in Northwest Europe between September and December of 1944, compiled by the USS Army's Operational Research Section, indicates that fewer than 8% of American tank kills against German heavy armor involved HVAP ammunition. The majority of Tiger and King Tiger losses continued to result from flank shots using standard ammunition, anti-tank gunfire, or most commonly abandonment due to mechanical failure or fuel shortage. But by the time German intelligence confirmed HVAP's scarcity, the psychological damage was complete. Panzer commanders had internalized a fundamental lesson: armor thickness has practical limits. German engineers understood this at a theoretical level. Dr. Karl Friedag, who worked at the Heereswaffenamt proving facilities, later stated in Allied interrogation, "By late 1944, we understood the mathematical constraints. Armor protection increases as a cubic function of thickness. You must add weight to the entire vehicle structure to support additional frontal armor. Meanwhile, projectile velocity improvements are essentially linear and require minimal additional resources. We calculated that achieving immunity against American HVAP round would require frontal armor approaching 300mm effective thickness. The vehicle would weigh over 100 tons. It would be strategically immobile. Germany attempted this anyway. The Jagdtiger tank destroyer, entering service in September of 1944, mounted 250mm of frontal armor. It weighed 72 tons. Maximum speed, 34 km per hour on roads, rarely achieved. Production total, 79 vehicles. The Panzerkampfwagen 8 Maus. A grimly ironic name was even more extreme. 2 prototypes were completed in late 1944. Weight, 188 tons. Armor, 240mm on the turret front. The Maus could not cross most bridges. Its ground pressure exceeded the bearing capacity of many road surfaces. It consumed fuel at such a rate that its operational radius was measured in dozens of kilometers. Neither prototype saw combat. Both were destroyed by their crews during the retreat in 1945 to prevent capture. These were not tanks. They were engineering statements, desperate attempts to restore the doctrine of invincibility through sheer mass. They proved only that the doctrine itself was obsolete. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The deeper tragedy was this. While German engineers obsessed over armor thickness and gun penetration, they missed the actual reasons they were losing the armored warfare campaign. The United States did not win through superior tanks. American victory came through operational mobility, logistics, air superiority, and overwhelming numerical advantage. For every King Tiger Germany produced, America built 100 Shermans. Those Shermans came with dedicated tank recovery vehicles, the M32 that could retrieve damaged tanks under fire and return them to service within hours. They came with standardized spare parts manufactured at massive scale. They came with fuel trucks, ammunition carriers, bridging equipment, and most critically, complete air superiority that interdicted German supply lines while protecting American movements. Germany produced 492 King Tigers total. Peak monthly production reached 84 vehicles in August of 1944, the same month HVAP ammunition entered field use. The United States produced 49,234 Shermans. Peak monthly production, 2,464 vehicles in December of 1943. Even with a 10-to-1 kill ratio, which was never achieved in practice, the mathematics were impossible. Germany could not win a war of attrition with technological superiority alone, but the invincibility doctrine had pushed German tank design in precisely the wrong direction. Instead of producing more medium tanks, vehicles like the Panzer IV or Panther that were easier to manufacture, maintain, and supply, Germany committed resources to super-heavy tanks that broke down constantly, consumed irreplaceable fuel, and required specialized recovery equipment that often didn't exist. Combat loss statistics reveal the extent of the failure. Of the 492 King Tigers produced, approximately 150 were confirmed, destroyed by enemy action, knocked out by tank fire, anti-tank guns, aircraft, or mines. The remaining 342 were either abandoned due to mechanical failure, destroyed by their own crews during retreat to prevent capture, or ran out of fuel and were left behind during Germany's final collapse. The tank designed to be invulnerable died most often from its own complexity. The human cost, not all German tank commanders accepted this reality immediately. Some clung to the invincibility doctrine until the end. SS Obersturmführer Bobby Wool commanded a King Tiger in Schwer SS Panzer Abteilung 501 during the final German offensive in the West, the Battle of the Bulge, in December of 1944. In a letter to his wife, dated January 3, 1945, he wrote, "They say the enemy has developed special ammunition that can defeat our armor. I do not believe these reports. Our Tiger is the finest armored vehicle in the world. German engineering remains superior to anything the Americans or Russians can produce. We will hold them." Wool's King Tiger was destroyed on January 15, 1945, during the defensive fighting in Hungary. A Soviet Su-100 tank destroyer mounting a 100mm gun penetrated his King Tiger's turret at 600 meters. Wool was 23 years old. He died before learning that the gun that killed him wasn't firing exotic ammunition. It was simply a larger caliber weapon with higher velocity than the Soviets had fielded in 1943. The armor that was supposed to protect him had become obsolete, not through revolutionary technology, but through incremental improvements in conventional weapons. The survivors carried different lessons. Johannes Kuhlmann commanded a King Tiger during the Ardennes offensive. His vehicle was knocked out on December 23, 1944, not by enemy fire but by transmission failure. He and his crew spent 4 days destroying sensitive equipment and walking back to German lines through American-controlled territory. In a post-war interview conducted in 1998, he reflected, "The worst moment was not when the transmission failed. We were used to mechanical problems. The worst moment was in August, when we first heard about the frontal penetrations. When I saw the photographs of the entry holes through glacis plates that were supposed to be invulnerable. That was when I understood. Everything they had told us, all the assurances, all the testing, all the tactical doctrine, it was built on temporary advantage, not permanent superiority. They told us we had 200 millimeters of protection. They didn't tell us that 200 millimeters would be enough only until it wasn't, that the enemy would adapt. That physics doesn't respect national boundaries or engineering pride. Otto Karius survived the war. He lived until 2015, long enough to give numerous interviews about his experiences. In a 2004 interview, at age 85, he said, "People ask me about the Tiger. They think I must have loved it. I tell them, I respected the Tiger. I understood its capabilities and limitations. But love? No. By 1944, every time I climbed into a heavy tank, I knew the armor was only protection until the enemy developed the counter. And they always developed the counter. The HVAP was just the first. Then came the Soviet 100mm guns. Then the British developed improved 17-pounder ammunition. The race never ended. We just ran out of resources to keep competing." The final accounting, By May of 1945, when Germany surrendered, the invincibility doctrine lay in ruins along with the Reich itself. American factories had already moved beyond HVAP. The T-15E-1 round, entering production in early 1945, could defeat 230mm of armour at 500 metres. The British armour-piercing discarding Sabot APDS rounds for the 17-pounder gun demonstrated similar performance. The Soviets fielded the BR-412D round with hardened tungsten carbide cores for their 100mm guns. If the war had continued another year, Germany would have needed 400mm of effective frontal armour to maintain the same protection level they believed they had in June of 1944. The vehicle would have weighed over 200 tons. It would have been strategically worthless. The lesson the Panzer commanders learned, the ones who survived. To learn it was brutal in its simplicity. There is no such thing as invincibility. There is only temporary advantage, the gap between what the enemy currently has and what they are capable of developing. Armour is a stopgap measure, a tactical advantage that persists until the enemy creates the counter. And in industrial warfare between peer competitors, counters develop faster than steel. 200mm of frontal armour was not enough. 300mm would not have been enough. No amount of armour would have been enough, because the German calculation was fundamentally wrong. They believed they could engineer their way to invulnerability. They learned, too late, that the only real invulnerability comes from logistics, production capacity, resource access, and strategic mobility, precisely the areas where Germany was catastrophically outmatched. The King Tigers that survived the war preserved in museums, displayed as monuments, still bear the scars. Visitors can touch the armour, run their fingers over the penetration holes that shouldn't exist. The entry wounds are small, surprisingly so, 5 or 6 centimetres in diameter, clean punctures through steel that was certified impenetrable. Those holes represent more than engineering failure. They represent the moment when belief collided with physics, when doctrine met reality, when the promise of invincibility revealed itself as illusion. Ernst Bachmann survived the war. He died in 1979, age 55. In his few recorded interviews, he rarely discussed tactics or kill counts. When asked about the King Tiger, he usually said only, "It was a good tank, but there are no invincible tanks. I learned that in August of 1944. The day his King Tiger burned, Bachmann sat in that ditch beside the road and watched flames consume the machine that was supposed to protect him. He stared at the penetration hole, the impossible, puncture through armour that mathematics said should not exist, and he understood, perhaps before most of his comrades, that the war was already lost, not because of that one tank or that one engagement, but because the entire foundation of German armoured doctrine had been constructed on false assumptions about the permanence of technological advantage. 200mm was not enough. It was never going to be enough, because physics doesn't read doctrine manuals, and tungsten doesn't respect test results from Kummersdorf. The projectile that struck Bachmann's tank obeyed only physical laws: mass, velocity, sectional density, impact angle. Those laws don't recognize national boundaries or engineering superiority or ideological certainty. They simply are. And on August 13, 1944, they wrote a new equation across the glacis plate of a King Tiger, an equation that said, "No armour is thick enough to stop the future." The German Panzer commanders learned this. Lesson in fire and steel and penetrated armour. But the lesson remains, etched in those museum-preserved penetration holes, a permanent reminder that invincibility is always temporary, advantage is always conditional, and belief is no defence against physics. The King Tigers are gone now. 79 years since the first HVAP round punched through what was supposed to be impenetrable. The crews who died are long buried. The survivors are all dead now, the last of them gone within the past decade. But walk through those museum halls. Look at the King Tiger in the Bovington Tank Museum, the one at Fort Benning, the one at Kubinka outside Moscow. Stand before that sloped glacis plate, 150mm thick, angled at 50 degrees. 200mm of effective protection. Look for the penetration holes. They're there. Small, clean, impossible. And remember, it wasn't enough. Thank you for watching. For more detailed, historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.